Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
When the three-quarter crown is done to your satisfaction, the pin facing on the acrylic palette is placed back in the visit-on model. Make sure that the pin facing is aligned properly, and then we're going to scribe a mark on the distal of the central incisor. And let me turn that around a little bit so you can see that. And we use a sharp pencil and scribe a mark as you see here, which is going to be too far out. And then we'll remove the facing and try to then make a mark a millimeter behind that. We'll place the facing back in to verify the position of that second line. And as we look at it, it is back sufficiently. So we will use that line then to establish our finishing line. And we'll erase the first line so that we don't get confused with the position of that finishing line. I like to use pencil lead on the melamine teeth and the extracted teeth, also for natural enamel on actual clinical cases. It's very difficult to see in a mirror, and it's difficult to see white on white. Here we're marking a line where we're going to make the first cut. We'll take an inverted cone diamond and run right down this marginal ridge, right down to the cervical to make a V groove. And this area mesial to that beyond that will not be prepared. Now the placement of the ledges is very critical. And we will use a little different technique for establishing the height of our ledges. Dr. Miller, in a thesis project, found that a very accurate way of establishing the height of a ledge is using a Bowley gauge. And we will set this Bowley gauge at 2.5 millimeters. And what this will do then, in setting it at 2.5 millimeters, it will give us 2.5 millimeters of tooth width at the point where it's touching the tooth. In other words, then we can take a 0.5 millimeter off of the lingual surface, have a 0.5 millimeter ledge, and still have 1.5 millimeters of tooth tissue left. If we make the ledge too wide and a tooth too thin, the gold will show through on the labial surface. We'll take a little bit of graphite and place it on the end of the Bowley gauge, and then run this across the incisal edge here, and you'll notice that we've made a mark. Now we'll darken that mark a little bit so that we can see it readily. Now that will be the position of our incisal ledge. The cingulum ledge will be at the same level that the cingulum ledge was placed on the cuspid. At the height of this cingulum, we will place this ledge at this point here. We want to preserve as much of the cingulum as we can. If we place this mesial marginal ridge cut too far to the center of the tooth, there's a danger of drilling a pinhole right into the pulp. So we will keep this right along the edge of the tooth. Now we will make our first cut using the inverted cone diamond. This diamond will cut very readily through enamel, and it'll cut almost too efficiently in the melamine. So we will be doing just a minimal amount of cutting with the air rotor on this melamine tooth. Run this right down that mesial surface, right through the pencil line. This cut should take you through the enamel into the dentin, and this will be deeper than the rest of the lingual reduction of the preparation. Now, while you have the same instrument in your hand, then we will cut through the enamel on the lingual surface and right through the enamel to a depth of about 1 millimeter. When that has been cut, then we will do the same thing down at the cingulum. And I'll tip this up just a little bit so you can see it a little better. And at that cut, this can be just a little bit deeper. Okay, now we'll dry that off. And with the pencil then, let me mark what we've done so far. We've placed a V groove down the mesial surface. We've made 2 ledges. The next step is to reduce the lingual surface, and we'll be using a WM1M diamond on the air rotor, and we'll be reducing this lingual surface about the thickness of 2 pieces of 28 gauge green wax, or about 1/2 millimeter. Again, this melamine does cut quite rapidly, so use a light touch on this. And we'll just wipe the tooth tissue away. Not taking too much away. You might want to take a little bit more off where the patient is occluding or where there is a centric stop. You'll find that this diamond will work very nicely and fit to the contour of the lingual surface of the tooth. At this time, we'll also take a little bit off at this incisal and a little bit at the cingulum at this point. And you'll notice that we're not going as deep as that V groove that we've cut on the mesial of the tooth. Now let me dust this off and show it to you. Now you can see that we have the lingual surface reduced. The next step then is to put a 699-9M diamond in the air rotor, and then place our cervical finishing line and our slice on the distal surface. We're making our slice then from the pencil line that we have scribed on the distal, and with that diamond come all the way around to the lingual surface, ending in the little notch that we've made with the inverted cone diamond. When we finish that, with the same diamond then we will make our incisal bevel and blend the slice into the incisal, trying not to show our finishing line from the labial view. Let me turn this a little bit so you can see that mesial, the distal slice and the marking. Use a light touch, come right up to the pencil mark, but not beyond it. And then bring this around carefully to the lingual and make a little groove where we will end our finishing line on the lingual surface. And then we'll take the same diamond and make our incisal protection, rounding this angle just slightly so it blends into the slice, and making sure that we have a finishing line from where the incisal bevel and this mesial finishing line meet, so the continuous finishing line. Okay, now I'll dry that off and blow it off and try to mark with a pencil the finishing line that we have. It's a little difficult to do. The roughness does mark pretty well. So we have this finishing line now, and we can keep it above the shroud as we did with the preparation of the cuspid. We have a definite groove in this area here, and our finishing line comes up along the incisal edge and ends right over here. I'd like to show you on a model now some of the important parts of this preparation. You'll be able to see it a little bit better on this larger plaster model. In order to get strength on a very thin casting that will fit over this restoration, we will have to have these incisal and cingulum ledges. These ledges give us extra gold that will act like an angle iron to prevent this casting from bending. If the lingual thickness is only a half a millimeter, this could bend very readily, especially when there are pontics attached to this and there's torque and twisting on the pontics. This is transferred to the abutment tooth. So we have to have these incisal and cingulum ledges. Also, it's very necessary to make this mesial finishing line a little bit deeper than the rest of the preparation here, and that acts again as a strengthening area, giving more rigidity to our casting. And then our slice on the distal here acts as another area that prevents this casting from bending. So in effect, we have a quadrangle: the deeper finishing line on the mesial, the two ledges, and then the slice. And this quadrangle will then prevent this casting from bending and give it some rigidity. As you can see from this preparation, there's very little retention so far, and the only real retention will come from the pins themselves that will be placed in this preparation. Therefore, the pins should be placed the proper length so that we do get good retention on this preparation. So the next stage then will be to refine our ledges and then place some recesses. As you can see that we have up in the incisal some recesses that will allow us to drill the pinhole in the incisal area and a small recess on the cingulum. If we make the entire ledge as wide as the recesses, the ledge will be so wide that, again, gold will show through on this thin incisal, and it will make a very unaesthetic restoration. So we like to keep this ledge thin, and in the areas where we have to drill our pinholes, we'll make it just a little bit wider so that we can seat our drill in those particular areas. A 170L carbide in a slow-speed handpiece is used to refine the incisal and cingulum ledges. When you use a diamond to place these, the finishing line is rather irregular, and the carbide is used then to sharpen this up. Your knowledge of pulpal anatomy is very important in the placement of the recesses, because where the recesses are placed, then that is where the pins will be drilled. And if you can imagine, we have a pulp coming up in this area, pulp horns. We want to stay away from the pulp horns. The drilling of the pins and the placement of the pins is rather important, because if we get a pulp exposure, of course, then this necessitates a root canal. Also, if the pins are too close together, they have very poor stability. You can imagine this somewhat like a tripod. And if you have a tripod with its legs very close together, it's very unstable and you can knock it over easily. But if the tripod has its legs far apart, then it is very, very stable. Now, the same thing is true with this pin ledge. We want to keep the pins as far apart as possible for stability on a tooth, and again, as far apart as possible to stay away from this pulp horn. We'll use this carbide then to just refine the ledge, sharpen it up. It doesn't have to be made too much wider than it is already. It just has to be sharpened up slightly. And we'll do the same thing down at the cingulum and make just a little more of a notch there for our pin. Let me dry this off now and show you what we have. I'll just sharpen this up a little bit right in here and in here. Now, we will make a recess and place a pin in this area here, and the mesial pin will be tucked up right against this finishing line that we have placed on the mesial surface. If you put the recess too far to the center of the tooth, you'll hit this pulp horn. So the recess should be tucked right up against the end of this preparation. And the cingulum pin, in this particular case, will be right in the center of the cingulum. You'll find sometimes, however, because you're trying to draw the bridge with some posterior abutment, and the draw may be different, and the angulation of the pins would be toward the pulp on the cingulum pin, we will then straddle the pulp. And instead of putting one pin in the very center, we will put perhaps a pin over on this side, on the mesial and distal, so that we then have straddled the pulp and we don't risk going into the pulp chamber. In this particular case, the draw will be sufficient so that we can make the direction of the pin in the long axis of the tooth. And if the cingulum pin is in the direction of the long axis of the tooth, it can be 3 millimeters long without hitting the pulp. Well, the recess does not have to be very deep. Just a small little notch in this incisal. Again, if you make this recess too wide, it's going to show through on the labial. And I will tuck this little recess into this corner here and refine this recess down at the cingulum. Blend this in. While you have this this 170L burr in the handpiece, we will also use it to refine our mesial finishing line and the little groove that we have placed. You just run it right down this to make it nice and sharp. And by turning this, we can run it down this surface, give us a very sharp finishing line again for waxing, sharp finishing line for our technician to see where our margins are. This is a small, minute preparation, and it's very important to get these little details into this preparation because they add to the strength of the casting, and this will affect where our pins are going to be placed. The next step then is to take a half-round burr and place dimples in the areas where we're going to drill our pinholes. The twist drill that we're going to use to drill the pinholes does not cut through enamel at all, and it's very inefficient. It cuts through dentin very readily. So we have to make a little cut through any remaining enamel that we would have so that we can drill the pinhole efficiently. Also, it's just like drilling a hole in the fender of an automobile. You don't take a twist drill and just start drilling because it'll skate all over the surface. We make a little recess, a little dimple, to set our drill in, and then we can control its direction. Let me erase some of the pencil marks here and mark where we're going to put our recesses for our pins. Now I have little dots where we'll place this half-round recess to make a seat for our twist drill, and this just need be just a small dimple through the enamel.
Yeah.
Just a small dimple. Just to get the burr started. And then we'll move over to the cuspid, where we still have to drill our cingulum pin. I'll dust that off. It's rather difficult to see that recess. And then the next thing to do then is to place your twist drill in your latch type contrangle. Now the twist drills are a little different than the other drills that you have in that they are somewhat like a drill that you use for drilling through wood or metal. And they cut very efficiently on the end, but do not cut very well laterally. And they come in various sizes. The two sizes that you probably will be using the most are the 3/0, which is 0.7 millimeters in diameter, and the 4/0, which is 0.6 millimeters in diameter. The thinner twist drills are used on thinner teeth like lateral incisors or lower centrals or laterals. And the larger twist drill, the 3/0, is used in centrals. The larger the pinhole, the larger the diameter, the greater the retention will be. The greater the length, the greater the retention will be. These twist drills are not to be used in high speed. In fact, slow speed, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 RPM, is just about right. Now, we will have to determine the proper line of draw. And the first pin is very critical because we have, as you recall, placed a groove on the mesial and the distal of the cuspid. And all the pinholes that we drill will have to be in the same axis, in the same line of draw. So by placing our drill in the groove itself and then moving this over to our cingulum pin and viewing this from two directions. You can do this by looking at it from one side with a mirror, and while you're looking at it from the other angle with your eye, or you can use a dental assistant looking at it from one direction while you're looking at it from this direction so that you can parallel these cuts. I would suggest that you use one of your lab neighbors to help you when you're drilling these pinholes. And we'll start out by drilling the cingulum pin on the cuspid, and we're using a very slow speed. Never stop a twist drill in the tooth. You always go in and out while it's still rotating. If you stop it in the tooth, you might jam it and break it off. Once we have the pinhole drilled, we will then measure the pinhole with a zero probe. The cingulum pin should be about 2.5 millimeters in depth, and that's still a little bit shallow. So we will go just a little bit deeper. And then as a guide, we'll place an impression pin, the pin that you're going to use to take an impression, into the pinhole itself. And tap it down. The impression pins are stainless steel pins, and they are just slightly smaller than the twist drill itself. And they are perfect cylinders, and they are 6.5 millimeters in length. And they are replaceable. So if one pin might come out of your reverse impression, you could take another one and place it in without any problem. These pins, the metal pins, are used when you're going to silver plate your impression. If you're going to use stone dies, then you would use a Perlon plastic pin of the same diameter and length. Now we'll look at this pin from two directions and from the incisal to make sure that we're in the proper line of draw, and it looks like we line up with our grooves. When you're looking down the tooth from the incisal, it's wise to close one eye, because if you use both eyes with binocular vision, you can naturally see down both sides of the tooth. Close one eye and you should be able to see down the center of that pin and both of the grooves. Now this will be our guide pin for our next cut. And we then will take our twist drill, line it up with the cingulum pin, and line it up, and we'll cut this incisal pin here, a distal incisal pin next. It's the closest one to this pin. We'll move back and forth, and you'll be checking it from this direction. You should have a lab partner check it from this direction. This way you can cut the parallel pins without a paralleling device. There are many paralleling devices on the market, and as you get into the junior and senior clinic, you'll have a chance to use the various devices that are available. However, this is a very efficient way and a simple way of cutting pins, parallel pins, without a paralleling device. Back and forth to check yourself, and we'll cut it. Don't make it too deep at first. Dust it off, and we'll place the pin in and see if we're in the right track. Use a hollow tip pliers, and as we line that up from that direction and line it up from the distal, it looks like we're parallel, so that we then can deepen that pinhole to the depth of 3 millimeters. And as I mentioned, we do not stop the twist drill when it's in the tooth itself. We always bring it out again. The depth of the pinholes should be measured with a zero probe to check to see if we have the proper depth. The impression pin then is placed in to see if it matches the guide pin, and it does. So we'll drill the remaining pinholes parallel to our two guide pins, carrying it down to the depth of 3 millimeters for the incisal, and we'll place our guide pin in that, and that is parallel, and we'll drill our cingulum pin, lining it up with our two incisal pins to a depth of 2.5 millimeters. And then we'll place a guide pin in that, and all the pins should line up, and they do. The mesial pin is just a little bit short, so we will re-drill that to make sure we have the 3 millimeter depth on the mesial and distal incisal pin, and we have a 2.5 millimeter depth on the cingulum pin. Now that's down the proper depth. The pin should be removed and then a recess placed with a number 4 round burr where the pin enters the tooth itself. This is to allow a better connection of the gold to the metal pin itself. When that's finished, the preparation is sanded with a sand disc, making sure that you maintain the fine margins that you have developed. The details of the preparation should be checked, and the depth of the pins checked with a 0 probe. And if everything looks good, then the impression pins are replaced in the tooth and a rubber base impression is taken.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.